All right. Well, good, because I was going to go into the spiel about Krav Maga and how that came along. I got introduced that just recently with the American Fighter Camp here in Charleston, but I've got someone who knows all about different techniques as he's grown with the sport of MMA. And, of course, I'm talking about the CEO of Rev Gear, Mr. Paul Reavlin. How are you doing today, Paul?
Good, guys. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know, he's going into the spiel on female or women's MMA. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, actually, believe it or not, I don't enjoy watching women's MMA for some of the same reasons. It doesn't seem that at this point a lot of the women have the skills to defend themselves, and often I'll be sitting home watching the fights and just watching women get beat up, and I think that I'm all for it. I think it's important that women learn and grow and learn how to defend themselves, but sometimes, it seems the majority of the times you're watching the fight, and the women are taking such a beating because they just don't have the defensive skills. So I'm all for it. If they use more Rev Gear and learn to protect themselves better, then I think it's going to be a great thing.
I like that. Yeah, it is interesting, especially with Strikeforce. They seem like they have, not the greatest amount of women fighters there. So it seems like some of these bouts are a little uneven as they get thrown into the cage. But I touched on just a little bit about Rev Gear, their history, growing with the sport. But can you, for some fans who have seen the gear on, the likes of Fabricio Verdum and Chris Cyborg and all these great fighters, could you give us a little history lesson real quick of just how you came into the business that is MMA?
Sure. Rev Gear was started about 16 years ago, and I started the company with the idea that I really just needed some equipment for some guys that I was training with, and we were training in Krav Maga, and we were punching and kicking. We thought we were punching and kicking pretty hard, but I'm sure we weren't kicking any harder than anybody else. However, the stuff we were using just didn't hold up to what we wanted. So I was a practicing accountant with a martial arts hobby, and so I figured this wasn't rocket science. I ought to be able to do this. So that was it was 16 years ago. It launched this odyssey that now Rev Gear is a real company with, we work with a lot of these fighters. But I found early on that people who were doing MMA at the time, the equipment was resonating with them because it was designed for a lot of heavy hitting and could take a lot of punishment. At the beginning, I only had 4 products, a couple punching bags, a pair of gloves, and some shin guards. The shin guards are still used today by guys like by Pedro Hizzo and Marco Ulas. These are guys who want to really blast, and so they wanted gear that could really hold up and they could train pretty hard without hurting each other. And so they still ask me when they go down to Brazil. They want to stuff a suitcase full of gear and take it down there. But basically, the equipment was designed for a lot of heavy hitting, and so it has its roots in MMA since the day MMA was born, really, and we've been growing with the sport. So now there's, we have a host of fighters besides the ones you mentioned, but we work with fighters from WC, Strikeforce, and now we're working with fighters in the UFC who all use our stuff for their training.
Absolutely. And one of our frequent guests is MFC owner Mark Pavlich, and I don't know if you saw some time back kind of a rant on the UFC and the sponsorships there. You came in the same time as TapOut, who is a big sponsor partner, I guess, with the UFC. Is there any kind of conflict or anything of that nature with the UFC being so tight with TapOut for people like yourselves and other brands? Well,
it's a good question. A lot of brands have come and gone within the UFC, and we find that, Rev Gear tends to be specifically a gear brand. We're known for making professional gear for professional fighters. That's what we do. we're making the stuff that the guys are training in or training with, and it's more of a necessity than it is, a chosen item that you might wear, like a shirt or a hat or a hoodie. Clearly, there's some equipment brands. The majority of the brands you see in the UFC, at least in my opinion, a lot are more apparel brands. And while we have some apparel, that's not what we set out to do. And there's obviously, TapOut exploded. When I started Rev Gear early on, I would go to local MMA events, and I'd have a table and I'd be trying to sell my 4 items, and Charles was right next to me, and he had 3 or 4 T-shirt designs. And, there was a time when MMA got pushed underground, and Charles stuck with it, to his credit, and I ended up marketing more to just mainstream karate schools and whatnot. And so when MMA exploded and The Ultimate Fighter was on TV, TapOut brand, to their credit, exploded with it. And so I believe that getting on TV, the UFC relationship was very helpful for them. It was never any conflict for us, just a goal for us to get back into the UFC because we had some fighters in there a long time ago. And now, as of recent, we have basically got back in, and we were on Shane Roller last week and Chris Lytle the week before, and, you'll see us on some fighters coming up on Ultimate Fight Night and whatnot. So we're happy to be back in the UFC. We're happy to be on TV. And I think will do a lot for our brand. But we to this date, martial arts schools around the country know who we are because we've marketed very heavily to them instead of the consumer level, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I was speaking with Matt Robinson down at the American Fighter Charleston here, and he said that he's been using Rev Gear since they opened years ago, and he raves about you guys there. So, it's very good that you seem to know your brand, know where your home is, although smart enough to expand there and continue to get that name out there. So,
I appreciate that. I think that, MMA has allowed us, or has really built a market that wasn't there just 6 or 8 years ago. And it may have even been sooner, but really, for the longest time, the martial arts was a niche market that you only knew about if you were in the martial arts circles. When UFC exploded and the Ultimate Fighter exploded, that opened up all new markets to consumers who weren't familiar with martial arts, have never punched and kicked anybody in their life, and probably never will. But they're fans of the sport, and they still participate, and they still purchase products in the industry and whatnot. So that new client base is probably 10 times larger than anything that had existed prior. So it's an exciting time. There's still a lot of room for growth in MMA, and for companies like us, it's a chance to do more mainstream things. For us to sponsor an athlete just 8 years ago, it meant sponsoring someone in a niche, in a jiu-jitsu tournament or in a sport karate tournament, someone that wouldn't really have mass appeal and people would know them walking down the street. But with MMA, obviously, we have nationally well-known, internationally well-known athletes that we could sponsor no different than any other professional sport. And we can ally ourselves with an athlete and do stuff from a marketing standpoint that we never could do years ago. So it's pretty exciting, and it's a great time. It's a great time to be involved with MMA, and we're stoked about it.
Absolutely, and it has exploded. And being there from the start of it all, what's been today? What's the biggest difference for you in Rev Gear, as opposed to 16 years ago when you started?
Well, I think that these days, believe it or not, Rev Gear is still not the most well-known brand in MMA by any means, and we still got a long way to go. But we could go places. People who work for me can go to places and mention they work for Rev Gear, and people know who we are, and they get excited and want to be affiliated with the brand in some capacity. Even if it's just something simple like a UPS driver showing up at our office to drop something off, when they see who we are and what we do, they get excited, and they see the stuff around our office. It's just kind of a cool novelty for people to come in and see what we do. See the fighter posters autographed on our wall and autographed gloves and things that we have, that showcase our history. And so I think it's become so mainstream that it's really amazing. When I started the company 16 years ago, I would drive around in my Mustang, my convertible Mustang, in the summer, going door to door at martial arts schools, and it was hot. So it was tough doing business. And don't get me wrong, it's just as hard to be in business today as any other time, and it still requires hard work. But the environment's so different, and there's just so much more opportunity, and it's such a different climate for martial arts and MMA that it's exciting, and we can do all these new things. So I think the biggest difference is just the market is so much bigger than it ever was, and we can be such a more legitimate industry than we ever were just as a small martial arts community when John McCain was stumping the country trying to get MMA banned in every state. I mean, it's just, you can imagine just that environment is so different from where we are now.
Absolutely. And what was the moment for you where you could, you knew that this is going to take off for you, and you could, did you immediately leave the full-time job and put everything in the Mustang and go door to door, or was there a moment?
Well, Rev Gear is a 15-year overnight success, and that's, for so many years I would see companies that just showed up, and we all of a sudden I knew who they were, had exposure to them, and when I dug deep, I realized that they'd put their work in for 10 years. I happened to have quit my job cold turkey, and I happened to go start selling door to door because I thought that was the best way to do it. In retrospect, around that time, people were setting up websites and loading up product on websites, and I could have worked full time and still sold my product over the web at night and on weekends, and probably grown as fast or just as fast. So I really did it the hard way in retrospect, but I don't think that I didn't really feel, there's a running joke in my company. I always tell people, wow, we're really a real company now, and we've been a real company for a long time. But I always joke, once we get things to look a certain way, or once we've launched a certain program, or once we're selling a certain amount of product, or once we reach a certain amount of sales, or once we show up on TV, then I feel like we're a real company. And those milestones have just been happening a lot over the last 3 or 4 years. But it's taken a long time and a lot of hard work. It just doesn't happen overnight, no matter how hard you work.
And that's a bold move. I've seen through I think it was RevGearSports.com. Or one of your other websites where the family, and it seems like your family man. How do you just just leave? Tell the family, okay, I've got a nice job, it's secure, but I'm going to try this other thing.
Well, the good news was that 16 years ago I wasn't married and I didn't have a family, and that enabled me to work day and night. I had no life at the time, and the only thing I thought about was Rev Gear, and I would sit, I had 50 or 60 punching bags in my bedroom, and I would sit there and stare at the phone and try to will it to ring like a Jedi mind trick, and that wasn't working. So I had to really get out and pound the pavement and bang the bushes. But I don't know. I know it's possible. I could have done it with a wife and family, but the stakes would have been much higher, and even at that time, it's a story I don't tell very much, but I had gone to some family, my grandmother to be specific, and I told her I need help paying the rent for 12 months while I get this business off the ground, and my grandmother didn't understand what it is I wanted to do. She didn't understand the industry. She didn't understand anything about what it is I was doing. And, she wasn't happy that I was giving up a job as an accountant, very, a profession that was, conservative. I could make a good living for myself. But she agreed, but every month after that, she promised. I said, okay, let's give it a year and see what it looks like. But after like 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, every month my grandma would come to me and say, okay, it's been a year, so let's give it up and go back to being an accountant, you know? And so that was pretty funny, but they got to the point where it was like, okay, I'm just going to really go do this on my own. And if it meant eating canned food or whatever I had to do, I was going to do it. But luckily, there was some point where I could get by, and it was okay. You know, but I'll never forget those experiences, you know, because sometimes that's what it takes.
Absolutely, I understand that. Now, you know, you've come a long way from having to worry, I guess, about canned food. You've got RevGear.com where people can get sponsored now if they're looking to pursue their dreams. Rev Gear, you know, looks like y'all give back as well as sell all your great items there. What's next for Rev Gear?
Well, you know, we have to be in any company these days in this economy, you have to continue to innovate. And we still work hard to do that. I still have some new products on my desk that we plan to launch or are working on launching they're new, they're innovative, they're going to help the guys who are getting in the cage really to improve their training. They can remain, you know, minimize injuries and keep training at a high level. So we have to keep building new products and continuing to be an innovator. And we have new shorts that are designed that are really high tech, that have some really cool features and just MMA. And you're going to probably see us a lot more on a lot more fighters in the UFC. We're set now for example, just on Ultimate Fight Night, you'll see us on Nam Fan, Leonard Garcia, possibly Dan Hardy, and you know, we'll be on a couple fighters. We'll be on Matt Yushchenko for UFC 129 in Canada, and a couple others on UFC 129, and then we're even talking about being on Roy Nelson for 130. You know, we're looking to expand our distribution. We're probably hoping to get into Canada, UK, and Europe this year. And you know, with the way the UFC is growing, there's exposure in these markets that just we've never had before. And so I think you're going to see us. You're going to see Rev Gear in a lot more places if you haven't noticed us already, and you'll see us in a variety of ways too. And we're currently. Are you guys familiar with Reggie Warren Jr.?
Oh yeah.
I am not.
No, okay. Well, Reggie Warren. Take some time to look at Reggie Warren Jr. online, and we're going to be doing our best to sign that guy. He's a real challenge to pin down, but he's an interesting character, and so when you have time, look him up so you can appreciate what I'm talking about.
RJ, you said you know the guy?
Yeah. I'm a friend of his on Facebook. He's got a hillbilly stick going. And he kicked the crap out of Aaron True.
He's a hillbilly. He's a hillbilly that has beaten up plenty of UFC fighters. So he's a funny character, and we're trying to pin him down and get his expertise to tell us all the good things and bad things we're doing at Rev Gear, because he seems to be an expert in a lot of things. So you know, we'll see how that goes.
All right, awesome. You know, we're bumping into our second interview of the night. I've enjoyed it thus far. I could talk to you all night, it seems here. But before we go, we know that, you know, if they're looking to fit their gym, fit themselves, they can hit up www.revgear.com. Is there any other things that either fans who want to know more about you or about Rev Gear, is there anything that they need to know or site they need to visit?
Of course. I mean, you know, these days everyone's on Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, you name it, we got it. So all you really have to do is search Rev Gear on Facebook or search Rev Gear on Twitter. You'll find us, and we're constantly in our blog. We have a blog that you can, of course, subscribe to, you know, we're constantly blogging about the latest fighters, the local people we're supporting, and all that stuff. There's a lot of good content there, and new products we're launching. So check out all those vehicles. You'll find us one way or another, and you know, we'll look forward to meeting you somewhere. You know, wherever we are, we're going to look forward to meeting you. So we'll be at the UFC Expos. Come out and see us, and you know, and if you're in LA, come see us too.
Absolutely, Paul. It's been a pleasure, and we hope to have you on again soon.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to meeting you face to face.